started and did the sound carvings discs that you said, I was interested in doing it with Metronome, which is a very small company which doesn't necessarily kind of, trip off the lips like, HMV or Decca or something. But for that reason, I had this control. I mean, I've had other experience of things coming out on CDs where even the artists have no idea what the disc would look like, as if this has nothing to do with it. To me, it's kind of huge. I suppose coming from the LP era, the actual look of the LPs on the shelf behind me is immensely important to me. That's what I grew up with. There's a lot of history in those album covers, not just the classical ones. Very, very strong, unlooked for sense of place, so that when I hear things on the radio, I kind of remember where I last heard them, that kind of thing, and everything is kind of tied down in a terrible kind of clawing network of references like that. I think that landscape is just a very useful metaphor for how music works. I mean, language is another one, but it's very complicated for reasons we know to employ that one. Place is very good because none of us sees the same location in the same way, and the landscape with nobody in it can lie dormant until it's visited, and in various ways like that.
And yet it is changing.
And yet it can change. I think it works very well for music, actually. Yes, it does. I also got involved in Balinese Gamelan in Queen's University as well, because nobody else was thought to be receptive enough to kind of being the sort of department rep, as it were. And so I got landed with it and ended up playing it. And that was also great. But again, it's a unison tradition with very cyclic kind of structures, but also it involved the repetition of a very small number of pitches, because these instruments don't play many notes, and that became very influential on me. So these two traditions, which had more in common with each other, and the kind of level I was working at anyway, the Irish and the Balinese had much more in common with each other, and they, I didn't want to turn into a kind of West Coast Californian composer with lots of sort of tinkly Balinese sounds, and people always hear those things in what I write, but completely subjectively. I've been accused of all kinds of klezmer music and Latin American, Paraguayan things. I mean, I don't know anything about any of these kinds of music.
It is possible to trace a lineage back, though, to Cal and Lou Harris and people of that generation.
Yeah.
But I think you employ it, it seems to me, in a much more subtle and understated.
Well, I'd love to think so, because I'm interested in extracting something that isn't the surface thing. The behaviour of Irish music or Balinese Gamelan. I used actually the Gamelan notes, the kind of recurring melodies. I used them in a kind of total serialism, actually, because I took the recurring patterns of notes in the tunes that I knew and converted them into numbers, and then used them as random number codes, so that my materials came back in a similar way, like 1 3 4 2 5 2 3 1 4, whatever. Whereas in Gamelan that might be something like. Once you convert that into kind of 1 2 1 3 1 2 2 1 2 3, you can then make that a kind of cipher that governs the sections of a piece or something. I felt that it's a good starting point for a composer to discover something of the language of a piece actually from the medium that he's working in. So an element of what goes into a string quartet should be kind of discovered from the fact that it's a string quartet. And certainly for students, I think that's a good training. I think one should discourage too much sort of abstract importing of stuff and then just sort of putting it onto the quartet. I think that awareness of the medium is likely to bring the instruments and the medium to life. Obviously, you get more experience, there are other ways of doing it. And I think there are some very distinctive composers who, for example, discover a lot in the medium that they write for. And I think there are other composers, and this is the distinction that lecture was about, I think there are other composers who very strongly carry around with them a set of apparatus and kind of visit it onto each medium, and are none the worse for that.